Hello, chicos. I'm sorry that I can't be with you today. Something has come up, and so I need to take a personal day. However, today we are doing guided notes on Ecuador. So pull out that sheet that you have, the copy in front of you of the guided notes on Ecuador, and we'll go through this short presentation on Ecuador. We did the reading on Ecuador yesterday, and so you have some background on this country. And to begin, Ecuador is a country that is located in South America, right? It's a country that is on the western coast, okay? It's located on the western coast of South America. It is located below Colombia and above Peru, okay? It's right on the equator. It's located on the western coast of South America. The size of Ecuador. Ecuador is a country that is about the size of Colorado. Okay, this state in the United States. It's about the size of Colorado. It is located in the Amazon. It is cut through by the Andes mountain range. The population of Ecuador is just about 15 million people. Here you have a star where the capital is. That's Quito. The population of Ecuador is just about 15 million people. Here's the bandera, the flag. The capital of Ecuador is Quito. So I flew into Quito for 7 days last spring. And the city is a very long, narrow city. It is nestled in the mountains. And so it can take you over an hour to drive from one end of the city to the other end of the city. Quito is the capital. However, the largest city in the country is Guayaquil. It has a larger population, over 2 million people. Guayaquil is the largest city in Ecuador. The money, the currency that's used in Ecuador, and this surprises a lot of people, is the United States dollar. There are several countries in the world that use the United States dollar outside of the United States as their currency. It's really easy for United States citizens to go travel to Ecuador and to pay for things there because they don't have to go through the currency exchange office. And so a lot of people will go there because they won't have to lose any money in that transaction of getting the currency exchanged. Ecuador uses this currency because it is more stable than their previous currency. The official language of Ecuador is Spanish. And within the last few years, another official language is the indigenous language of Quechua. Now we're familiar with this because we studied a country earlier in the year that uses Quechua. Okay. So the official language is Spanish. That's the first official language. Another official language is the indigenous language of Quechua. And nearly 1/3 of all Ecuadorians speak Quechua, about 5 million people. When you walk through Ecuador and you go into a bank, there are most likely people who speak Quechua there. There are Quechua-owned banks. There are banks that are especially for people who speak Quechua, similar to the prevalence of Spanish in this country. Okay, famous people. Francisco Eugenio de Santa Cruz y Espejo is a famous doctor, journalist, and patriot. He lived in the 18th century, and he lived in the time of colonial Ecuador, at the time that Spain had Ecuador as a colony, and he was born mestizo, so he was born as both of European and indigenous heritage. and he was interested in the sanitary conditions of Quito. He did research on this, and he did publish articles on it. He was also a patriot. He had many feelings about his country, and he wrote satirical works on the political happenings of the time, of the royalty within the country, those who came from European heritage. He wrote satirical works poking fun at them, and for this he was persecuted. He experienced a short exile and he was imprisoned. The other famous people that we are studying here in Ecuador, one of them is Juan León Mera, who was a novelist. And Juan León Mera lived in the 19th century, and he is actually responsible for having written the Ecuadorian national hymn. He was a novelist, he was a poet, so he wrote the lyrics to this hymn, and it is available to listen to online, so we will do that briefly. Juan León Mera, as a novelist, like many Latin American authors, worked for the political establishment. So he was involved in politics in the country of Ecuador. He worked for the president for some time, and he also belonged to the Real Academia Española, which is the Royal Academy, this Royal Spanish Academy that is known for having set forth standards for the country of Spain and for other Spanish-speaking countries as far as the language, the grammar, the vocabulary. And let's see, who's next? Famous people. Our next person to be talked about here is Eduardo Kingman, who was a painter. Here you can see that in this painting, Eduardo Kingman has painted several indigenous people, and this is a very common theme of his. So as a painter, he studied in Venezuela and in Bolivia, as well as in Quito, and he first became famous as he was working for the New York World Fair. He was a professor at the Escuela de Bellas Artes in Quito for 20 years, and he exhibited nationally, and his themes were the indigenous of Ecuador, the indigenous people of Ecuador, their suffering, and the poverty that they were experiencing, and that they do experience. Finally, for famous people, here we're talking about Rosalia Arteaga, a lawyer, politician, and ex-vice president. This woman was named as the first head of state in Ecuador. And as a lawyer, politician, and the ex-vice president, she also held office as president for 2 days in 1997 before resigning. This is the most famous volcano in Ecuador, and it is very well known throughout the world as being the tallest active volcano on the planet, Cotopaxi. It can be seen tens of miles, even 25, 30 miles in the distance as you are driving through Ecuador, as it is a very, very tall volcano. It is active. It did erupt in the recent decades, and this volcano here is among other volcanoes in Ecuador. It is a threat to the Ecuadorian people and to their livelihood, and so when you are an Ecuadorian person and you take out a loan from the bank, you can take out insurance that prevents your home from being destroyed by volcanoes and specifically from that destruction. I did microfinance research in Ecuador last year for 7 days. That's what I was doing there. So I talked to many bank owners in the country. The Galapagos Islands are located off the coast of Ecuador. They are a distance out, and so the species that are there are quite unique. And Galapagos Islands are famous as a tourist attraction due to their biodiversity. They are known for their giant tortoises. Here's one of them. And the famous Charles Darwin went to Ecuador, to the Galapagos Islands, to study evolution and to develop his theories of the process of evolution. So those studies took place here. One of the most famous artists from Ecuador is Oswaldo Guayasamín. Oswaldo Guayasamín, and he is a sculptor and a muralist, and he led the Cubism movement in Ecuador. He is also famous for having painted the indigenous in Ecuador, conveying themes of poverty and suffering. So he led the Cubism movement in Ecuador, and he was a sculptor and a muralist. Many tourists come to Ecuador to engage in sports. The Andes mountain range that cuts through the country of Ecuador makes for excellent trekking, style of hiking that involves scaling large heights. And many tourists come here to climb the mountains. You can see these are some very steep peaks. As you're flying into Ecuador, the most notable feature from your airplane window is that it is a very mountainous country. Okay, and our final note about Ecuador here is the latitude of Ecuador. It does run, the equator of the Earth runs through the country of Ecuador. Okay, Okay, so you can visit La Mitad, oh, excuse me, oh my gosh, look at this error. La Mitad del Mundo in Ecuador. This means the midpoint of the world. You may remember that from our previous lección that the 4 characters of Descubre were visiting La Mitad del Mundo. So we had Maite here running through and saying, "Ah, La Mitad del Mundo. It's been incredible. It's been nice visiting you. I'm getting back on the bus," right? Ecuador is a word that means equator. Okay, so the country of Ecuador is called Ecuador because it means equator and is on the equator. Okay, that's all that I have for you today. Okay, folks? If you have any questions about Ecuador, do send me an email. And your homework tonight, as Senora Adams will tell you, is to watch the video on my website on La Familia Real Española and to complete that laboratory activity that we did last Friday. It was optional. It's now not optional. Sorry about that. All right. Take care. I'll see you guys on Monday.